All right, and we are live streaming. Okay, I wanted to read an article. Hello out there, Radiant Creators. I wanted to read an article today, a short one, about how right now isn't really new. And many people are looking around right now and realizing, hey, has the world gone crazy, both like locally and then, of course, internationally? And also, are they after our freedoms? Are they trying to, domesticate us like herd animals? And, uh, anyway, I thought I would look at an article in Hot Rod Magazine from 1973 that shows that this moment is not really new whatsoever. So, since I'm just doing audio, I'm going to make the screen look like this. There's a bunch of Hot Rod Magazine covers. Now, let me get a little bit bigger here for a second, actually. Let me do like this. Yeah, and here's one. This is 1966, a Hot Rod Magazine from 1966. And back in 1966 especially, it's just about hot rodding. Look at this beautiful organic looking, dragster. And imagine this guy sitting like right between the tires there. That's a ballsy move. And this big engine. And this thing looks organic and beautiful. And in this magazine, if you go through it, it's all just hopeful stuff. It's just all, hey, here's parts, here's how to do things, Sunoco, here's how to do some engine block work, etc. And then so I have a whole year of 1960s. I should say a whole year of 1966. I was looking through, and it's just about, hey, hot rodding, building things, doing stuff. But then you go to the 70s, and this is I have a year of 1973 as well. And so 1973, by then the magazine had really changed, and this is the anniversary special edition, and it's got a lot of great stuff in it. It was a great year. But there's this article I wanted to point out and read it because I think it'll make maybe a lot of what's going on in the world make sense. So, 25 years of hot rodding street, um, the night the Flathead died, and I think this really gets into uh, some rather important points. If you just kind of follow along, it's short. I'll read it, and it shows that where we're at. Well, that course was charted. I honestly think starting in the early 70s. I really do. And hey, we went off the gold standard with Nixon. That could definitely be a part of it, and all kinds of stuff. So, and if you do like this one, this chat we're going to do real quick, this thing we're going to read, do check out this. I talked to Uncle Tony here, not my Uncle Tony, but that's what everybody calls him, Uncle Tony, and over at Uncle Tony's Garage. And I linked to it in the show notes, and we talked for about 2 hours about similar stuff like this and a bunch of other things. So if you enjoy this, you'll probably dig this, and if you enjoy this, you'll like that. Anyway, so let's just read this article, and we'll get out of here. But I think it might speak to people. I really do. I think it just might. So I'm going to read this. Not much to see, so you can just sit back and enjoy it. I'll do my best audible voice. I'll take off my little blue blockers, and here we go. By Steve Alexander. By Steve Alexander. The night the Flathead died. It was a typical summer evening in Los Angeles. The year was 1957, give or take a year. Somehow, I'd managed to tag along with the big kids that night, making it down to the old airport village to watch the street races. The airport village, long since just a memory, was a gigantic hamburger stand and gas station located in the center of a colossal bean field owned by billionaire Howard Hughes. The village itself was at the crossroads of Sepulveda and Centinalia. Yeah. I call it Centralia, but Centinalia. So Sepulveda and Centinalia, and was quite famous or infamous as a gathering spot for street racers. The attraction of the place to street races was twofold. Two long and wide streets crossed the perfectly flat bean field in mile-long straightaways, and the police in those days had better things to do than to bust street racers out in the middle of a bean field. Two matching red 40 Fords, two matching red 40 Ford coupes were scheduled to go off against one another that night. The hometown favorite was a legend on the streets of West LA. It was powered by a 53 Merc Flathead, bored and stroked with racing pistons, cam, high compression heads, and 3 twos. The other 40 belonged to a stranger. No one knew him or what he was running in the car. All we could tell for sure was that it had an overhead engine in it. Headers uncorked, the 240s rumped their way up Centennial to Jefferson. The crowd had already gathered along Jefferson, lining each side of the street for the full length of the quarter-mile strip. Somebody brought forth a flag, and as the two coupes stood quivering under the pressure of revved engines, he let the flag drop. We all knew the overhead would win, and it did, but we all silently rooted for the Flathead, hoping that by some miracle he would blow off the overhead and send us all home happy. Like the rest of the car freaks of the time, we knew a change had come. We knew the Flathead had had its day. We knew the overheads had taken over, but we resisted. And probably on that summer evening, in hundreds of towns and cities across America, other groups of street racers and hangers-on also resisted when the overhead came to town to blow off the local Flathead hero. An era had come to a close. Resist and cry as we might, the Flathead had died. Long live the overhead, 55, 6, and 7 Chevy forever. That's what it all had come down to. The T Roadsters, High Boys, and Deuce Coupes could no longer handle the pressure. They were no longer competitive. The hot tip was to get yourself a Chevy and build it up. You could get all the parts you needed right from your local Chevy dealer. There suddenly blossomed hundreds, even thousands of those mid-50s Chevys on the streets and drag strips of the country. The majority of them were just slightly warmed over with Duntov cams and maybe dual quads, of course, stock or not. They all had Corvette rocker covers. But those Chevys didn't last nearly as long as the old Flathead. By the early 60s, they had been surpassed by off-the-shelf hot rods straight out of the factories in Detroit. Ford had its 401 in 1961, Chevy had its 409 in 1962, Pontiac had its 383, working right in those same years. Multiple carburation, 4 speeds, and limited slip differentials with low gear ratios were available with your factory-ordered brand new hot rod. Detroit really started to get hip to the growing demand for performance cars in 1962. Chevy put a turbocharger on their Corvair. In 1963, Pontiac shoehorned their V8 into the compact Tempest. Ford followed suit in mid-year by increasing their new small block engine to 260 cubic inches and offering it in a lightweight Falcon, calling the concoction the Sprint. Ford returned to racing in 63, challenging the dominant Mopars and Chevys with 427-powered Fairlane-bodied monsters called Thunderbolts. The kicker came in 1964 when Pontiac introduced the first real muscle car, the GTO. The 3 letters stood for something ridiculously foreign like Gran Turismo Omologato, but official title didn't mean things to us. We all knew the car had been built for American streets. It came with options like Hurst shifted 4-speed and tri-power. It got you from one point to another in the quickest way possible. Muscle cars continued to boom through the 60s. 70s offered a 350 small block and then a 396 big block in the Chevelle. Ford upped their small block to a 289, 302, and finally a 351. Ford big block also enlarged, peaking with its 428 cubes. Chrysler brought back the Hemi and offered it in various body styles, including the Roadrunner, which was a street version of the NASCAR champion Plymouth. They also upped their 273 small block to 340 inches and transformed the big block into a whopping 440 incher. Who doesn't like the 440? Even staid American Motors got into the act. Long known for making economy cars, AMC came up with a 390 powered sedan called the Machine. Who doesn't dig those javelins? The muscle cars soon gave way to the pony cars, drive-ins, and boulevards filled with Mustangs, Camaro, Firebirds, Barracudas, and Javelins. Detroit reached its hot rodding peak in those cars. In the late 60s, they offered such winners as the Trans Am, Z28, Mach 1, CUDA, the AMX. Then the insurance and emissions roof fell in, and Detroit recoiled as the showroom-ready street racer market evaporated overnight. Today, we stand at yet another crossroads, not unlike where Sepulveda and Centinela. Today, we stand at yet another crossroads, not unlike where Sepulveda used to cross Centinela before the freeway was built. The Flathead is long gone. The 55, 57 Chevys are now classics, and muscle cars exist in name only. The car part is still there, but the machine is gone. The muscle is gone. A concession to a cleaner environment for us all. What's the next trip, you might ask? We've all asked that same question, but we all know for certain that it won't be decided in a street race. So, sorry, it's not the best reading ever, but really, the night the Flathead died, and I think that the movie I've always kind of thought was absolutely dreadful, but this reminds me of American Graffiti, and I think that actually took place in that movie where the old Flathead got beaten, and I could be way off on what was actually raced, but I thought it was a Flathead versus an overhead cam. And if I'm wrong, well, okay, I'm just wrong. I screwed it up. But anyway, with that said, so 1971 or so, we went off the gold standard, and you look at the magazines, the hot rod magazines of the 60s, they were hopeful, they were about all this cool stuff they were doing. And then in 70s, you see things really change. And one of the things that I'll point out real quick is, if I can find it here, don't want to keep it too long, but the many editorials, the many editorials in the 70s, you'll notice. This one is about inspection, auto inspection. Will it be another boondoggle? Then there's, opinion pieces about the catalytic converter, and you name it, and a lot of emission standards that were being created. And these articles are not just half-ass silliness. They really go deep into, hey, what do these regulations mean? What are they really about? And well, you know what? They're about a lot of the or all of the regulations and mandates and that are going on today. So you can look at the 60s, you can look at the 70s, and you can see sort of a curve going towards a domesticated and regulated society. And is it getting better or worse? Well, it was worse in the 70s than it was the 60s, and worse in the 80s than it was the 70s, and worse in the 90s than it was the 80s, and it's not getting any better. So not to be a doomer or anything like that, I'm not. I'm just saying that what we're dealing with today, I think, started in the beginning of the 70s, and it was even happening before then. But there's been an acceleration. It's what we're dealing with. It's what we're living with. And just realize that things like not being able to work on your car anymore. People used to be able to with the Model T and the Volkswagen Bug and many older cars in the past, with the tools you'd have in your garage or maybe even buying a wrench set, you could maintain your car for hundreds of thousands of miles. And now, when your battery dies, your car is trash. When it gets a dent, it's 40 grand to fix it. A shorted taillight can fry the computer in your car. And our ability to own our own machines and fix them has kind of been taken away, and maybe a lot more has been taken away than that. But anyway, not to be a doomer, but I'll link to the article, actually the podcast I did with Uncle Tony's Garage. It's funny, I actually happened to be just by chance wearing one of the t-shirts today, but he has a great video, and I'll link it there too, about where, this is what freedom looked like. This is what freedom looks like. And it was a pair of points, and how he didn't quite believe back in the day when we went from points distributors to electric distributors to electronic, that was the beginning of the end of freedom. What does freedom look like? Looks like a set of points on so many levels. And so anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. Check out the links in the description, and pass this around. I know it seems like it was about cars, but it's really about a trajectory. It's about cycles. And we're in one. We'll see what happens. Are we hitting bottom, going to bounce, or do we have further to go? I don't know, but you can survive and thrive. Listen to Radiant Creators. We talk to people who are thriving and living and inspiring, because even in a, maybe possibly the downwards trend in Western society, you can live and you can thrive and you can have a good time. You don't have to sink with the ship, and maybe you can be somebody who helps that ship not sink on many different levels. So anyway, freedom, take care.